is. I was told maybe Wendy Harvey also was working with you in that, and Wendy really wanted to come here today, but unfortunately she got some disclosure to do. So she sent her regret, and I just told Simon that we have two other Crown Councils from 222 Main Street that they're here, and they're eager to hear what is happening in Abbotsford. Thanks, Simon, for coming.
Everybody hear me? No? Yes? How's that? Better? Okay, I'll just keep my voice there. Okay, so obviously I'm call it frontline Crown. I'm not someone who formulates policy or investigates the entire justice system or comes up with proposals. I'm just one of those people working on the front line with these files in the Abbotsford office. And there are lots of other prosecutors across the province that have got to deal with these.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
Can we please ask people in the back not to make a lot of noises?
Hey, how's that? Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you about is a perspective from the front end of the system, okay? Not from the policy-making perspective of the system, but how some of us at the front end who have to work on these files on a daily basis have responded to the challenges of domestic violence files, okay? Clearly there's things going on at the upper levels that are changing things, but we can't sit and do nothing and wait for that to happen. We've got to deal with these issues on a daily basis, and at least in Abbotsford, and I know in a number of other Crown offices, some of which are here, we're trying to do things better, okay? We're trying to take hold of a system that's, to some extent, a bit lethargic in dealing with this problem, and trying to fine-tune it and come up with better practices and better ways of dealing with the challenges. And there are definitely challenges involved in combating domestic violence. All I can do is deal with the criminal justice system. That is my little chunk of the problem. So my goal has been to try and make the way that at least our part of the justice system deals with these files more effective, more efficient, more responsible to the victims. Okay? So I haven't been with the criminal justice branch all that long, 3.5 years. It seems like a very short period of time. I spent most of my professional career prosecuting drug dealers, so a completely different issue, more or less victimless crime. So when I joined the criminal justice branch, it was quite a change for me. But what I learned fairly quickly is that nobody really liked dealing with domestic violence. It was considered to be a very difficult subject to deal with, and a lot of us felt relatively ineffective in how our system was coping with the domestic violence files. Fortunately, I'm in a relatively small Crown office, and our admin Crown gave us free rein to tinker with the way we were doing things. So myself and a couple of my colleagues decided, let's tear this system apart and see if we can't make it a bit better. Invariably, on a domestic violence file, not all of them, but a huge number of them, Crown gets a call from the complainant complaining. Not of a crime, but that they're not happy with the way things are going. Either they don't want charges, or they want more charges. They want the accused detained, they want the accused released. They're not happy. Most of the time, they're not happy with something. Why are they calling us to tell us about it? Usually because the police have said, this is a problem for Crown to deal with. And what was the message they were getting from Crown? Generally, you should be talking to the police about this, or go talk to victim services. So it's fairly easy to see how complainants were feeling tossed around the system and not getting any support from any part of the system. So what we tried to do is to say that, look, all of these chunks of the system are capable of actually working together to solve these problems. Why don't we actually sit down and talk to each other and come up with a better practice of how we can deal with these files? So that's what we tried to do in Abbotsford. We recognized very quickly that these are extremely challenging files. These are victims, and I'm just talking about the women at this point, because obviously the victims of domestic violence are much broader than just the actual physical victim. But the victims themselves are vulnerable witnesses on par with a child who's been sexually abused. Crown deal with child witnesses in a very special way. But what we learned quite quickly is domestic violence victims are no less vulnerable and need no less support than children would. Not to put down domestic violence victims, but it is an extremely complicated issue that impacts them in a lot of different ways. So you can't just treat this person as if they were someone whose purse was snatched. Okay? You can't just say, okay, we've approved the charges, we're going to set it for trial, and on the day of trial, come in and talk to your trial crown and get on the stand and tell your story. Because if you do it like that, they're not even going to show up. Okay? Because by the time they get to that trial, they have lost all interest and all faith in the justice system. Okay? So very quickly you see these stats mount where a lot of these files, on the day of trial, either she doesn't show up and we stay the charges, or she does show up and says, I don't want to testify, or I've changed my mind, or I don't remember anything. So there were a huge number of stays of proceedings, the charges being dropped on the day of trial. So, I mean, that's the statistic we were looking at, and then our challenge was, how do we change that? How do we make it so that that disappears, that statistic? Because what that statistic is showing us is that these complainants are completely unsatisfied with the way the justice system is dealing with this problem. And I felt, and we felt, that we've got the ability to change that radically within the resources we're already working with, without changing the system, just by changing our approach to the handling of those files. So, we came up with a best practices plan, a project, to try and cope with that specific problem. And I mean, what is that specific problem? If a complainant doesn't show up at trial, or changes and recants her statement, or tells us she can't remember, or wants the charges dropped, what's happened? And what it appears to happen is either she never truly bought into the system, or she has lost all faith in that system and no longer wants to be a part of it. So our job, what we felt, is that we need to get this complainant on site right away, day one, when this assault happens, because there's no better time to start building a relationship with that complainant than on the day the incident happens. So if at all possible, our program tries to make contact with that victim the day the accused comes into custody, assuming he's arrested at the scene of the crime, which most of them are. So we put together a team. In this case, it was a team of two, myself and one other Crown at our office, who were going to exclusively deal with all the domestic violence files. Okay? We put together a practice of how we were going to consistently deal with these domestic violence files and domestic violence complainants on every case, so that we could have some predictability, some continuity, and more importantly, we could carefully fine-tune how we approached it. Because if it was just the two of us, and we did it the same way, we could quickly see if it was working or not working, and what we could do to change it. Okay? So the goal is to become more effective at dealing with these files, more efficient at using our system within the resources we already have. We didn't go to regional and ask for extra people or anything like that. We felt that we've got the skills, we can pull together a team and approach these files better. So we did. We got the two Crown that came together. In conjunction with that, we're lucky in Abbotsford in that our city police force, Abbotsford Police, we're sort of moving in the same direction at the same time. And we have a domestic violence unit established there. At the time, it was one detective. I think there was talks of putting a second detective on. And a designated victim services worker, who's here, to work with us. And that has seriously enhanced our ability to sort of get into these files. One of the points that Jeff Cowper made was this is a complicated problem. Saying that victims recant because of the delay between the offense and trial, I mean, that's certainly a factor. I think they lose faith with that amount of time lag, but that's not the only reason they go offside. But certainly one of the things we try to do is actively bring them further on side, right? They come at it from a perspective that, who are these people in the justice system? First time they see these people is when, something horrible happens to them, probably again, and the police show up at the door, either called by them or called by a neighbor, and intervene in their house and tear their family apart. So, I mean, even if they didn't have an inherent bias against the system, they probably have it at this point, okay? So part of the goal was to build a rapport with these victims and disabuse them of this concept that the justice system is their enemy and we're just there to tear their family apart. Because if you can imagine, if that's how they're thinking, why should they cooperate with us, right? So if we can make quick contact with them, if we can get them in, we can sort of diagnose the specific problems in this relationship. Now, we're not psychologists or social workers or anything like that. We're lawyers. So, we're doing what we can with the tools that we've got. But we do have tools to help us. We have police officers, we have victim service workers, we have Ministry of Children and Families. We have a variety of agencies in our community that we try to pull together to help us work on these files. As I say, as Mr. Calver was pointing out, almost every domestic violence case is different. So you can't just put a Band-Aid on it and say, well, this is going to work for everybody. So our perspective is to get every single victim into our office and sitting down with one of the two members of our domestic violence team to talk to her and find out what goes on, what led to this, what issues are you dealing with, and how can our community jump in and help, okay? So that's sort of the front end of our project, was to quickly make contact with that victim and start bringing them on board. Assuming that they don't like the system, they're not happy with the way it's gone, they don't know who's involved, the last thing we want them to do is to perpetuate those myths by ignoring them for 8 months while they wait for a trial date that they didn't ask for in the first place. Okay? So the first part of our project was designed to build a relationship with that complainant and figure out what problems existed in her life that we could help with, okay? The moment we approached the situation from that perspective, the number of complainants that came on site grew dramatically. Just with somebody sitting down and listening to what their concerns were, okay? When I started with the criminal justice branch, the Abbotsford approach to K files, to domestic violence files, was much like any other file, with the exception that we had a lot of complainants phoning in with complaints about Crown, about police, whatever. So we would take turns every week. A Crown would have to sit down and be the Crown that sat and did the K file interviews that week. Okay? There was no rhyme or reason to how we did it. We all approached it slightly differently. Nobody really wanted to do it, so nobody was really doing it very well. And nothing really came out of it. It was a meeting where we sat and we listened to somebody say, I don't want the charges, I want the bail dropped, I want him back, and we would check off the boxes and say, no, we're not doing that, thanks for coming in. So it achieved nothing except to perpetuate that myth that we were not on her side. So we changed that completely to the same Crown interviewing these people on a weekly basis, with the help of domestic violence specialists like victim services who would come into the interviews with us, and with the other resources in our community that we've made contact with, the Ministry of Children and Families, and the Vauwier Committee. We regularly meet with the Vauwier Committee to plug into the other resources that are in our community so that we can say, okay, I know what you need, I need to refer you to this person. They are willing to come and help you, okay? You've got family law issues. We know where the family justice counselors are. You go and talk to them, okay? The other thing that we picked up on, and a number of you, at least one of you mentioned, is that victims do not like dealing with sort of the blank suit. Okay, here's your suit for today. Tomorrow it'll be a different Crown. Continuity of Crown is gigantic in building a victim's faith in the system. And it's not that difficult, really. I mean, how hard is it to say, I'm the person who's handling your file, I'm going to take it, I'm going to do the charge approval, I'm going to run the bail hearing, I'm going to appear in court with it every time this accused is here, and I'm going to meet with you every time you have concerns. How hard is that? I don't need extra money, I don't need extra people to do that, I just need to coordinate where the files go. Okay? So that was something else that we focused our plan on, was to make sure that the face that that victim saw was always the same face. Okay? And again, I think, I don't have the statistics to show it, but at least anecdotally I can say that the impression that our complainants were giving us when they left was much happier and rosier than that old system where we had just said, nope. And then some other Crown had met with them the next time they came in to ask the same question. Okay? So, from that starting point, we built our project to sort of address those issues. How do we get this complainant to believe in us? How do we get her the help she needs? How do we get her the protection she needs? And how do we keep her on side for as long as we need her to be on side? And maybe it was part of our goal, or maybe it was just a latent effect. But what we started to see is that she's more likely to come back the next time and report it if she has faith in the justice system's approach to it this time. If we screw it up the first time, what are the odds she's going to call the police next time? So, that's sort of part of our deal as well. When we meet with these victims, we have a particularly different approach than when trial Crown meet with the victims. And the trial Crown are assigned on the file eventually to run the trial. And we're, almost doing the social work aspect of the Crown Counsel work, which not every Crown is happy with, but it needs done. To manage the Crown file, you need to do a certain amount of victim management, and it's a much harder chore when it's a domestic violence case. But eventually, sometimes a trial has to happen, and we have to turn it over to trial Crown. And largely, their interview with the complainant is going to be, here's the questions I'm going to ask you, here's how I want you to behave in court, here's what to expect from defense counsel, I'll see you on the day of trial. That's not the way we interview complainants from our K-file team perspective. Our interview with the complainant is a get-to-know-you interview. Find out more about her. Find out what the risk factors are in her world. Find out what might have led to this incident. Find out where she's going. It's a huge part of this. Are you planning on staying with this guy? Because if she is, there's very little we can do to stop that. But maybe we can make it less risky. Okay? If she's not going to go back to him, then great. Maybe we can help keep him away from her. So finding out those things, doing that risk assessment, that get-to-know-you interview, again, gave us a huge amount of ammunition for conducting that file that we didn't have before that, okay, in the previous way of doing it. Sometimes we'll get some of that information from the police. Sometimes the police will sit down and do, or would have done, a mini risk assessment. We're seeing a lot more of those now than we were back in 2009 and before. But, risk factors change. So we will have these interviews. We'll keep in touch with the victim. We'll plug them into resources in the community, help them get the counseling or the support they need, in the hopes that they're going to believe that we're on their side and stick with us. Because without the victim, we really don't have a prosecution. Okay? All right, so that was our starting philosophy. The other part of this, and this is sort of what we tried to do was come up with an imaginative approach to dealing with these files, because the standard approach doesn't always produce as effective results as with an impaired driving trial. And Mr. Cowper, I think, said that the tipping point of our justice system is the sentence. Well, that's not really how we see it in our K-file perspective. The minute the sentencing hearing is done, that's it. That's all we can do. So we're sort of letting her go on her way. So our perspective is sort of try and hold off on that. If there's still help we can give to this situation, why should we shut it down with a sentencing hearing? Once we've got the accused on bail, on some conditions, we have a certain amount of control and influence over this relationship. And if we've got that, and we can see there are still risk factors, why don't we use that control to try and minimize those risk factors, okay? We've got him on bail. Maybe he's not at the house. Maybe he's got no contact with her. Maybe she wants some contact. Well, maybe we can use this as a bargaining chip to try and get him to do some counseling before the sentencing, before he accepts formal responsibility. Maybe we can get her to go and talk to victim services or talk to the family justice counselor. So it's not really the traditional way of prosecuting a file, but we found it is an opportunity to intervene in this relationship. I mean, not truly the role of Crown, I suppose, but I mean, part of our role is to minimize the risk, protect the public, ensure somebody takes responsibility for it. So we try and keep that status quo with the bail situation for a longer period than we had in the past, so that we could bring more community resources to bear on the problem. And again, it's somewhat anecdotal, but we found that there were far fewer stays of proceedings on the day of trial because she didn't show up than there had been in the period before we started the project. So that was sort of the second portion of our approach to it, was to manage the files while they're in court. And they're managed by the same Crown. So the accused sees the same Crown, the victim sees the same Crown. That Crown knows the file better than any Crown normally would. And the dynamics of the relationship. So we've got a better opportunity to keep this person on board, deal with her issues, deal with his issues. Because really, oftentimes, we need to fix him as well as helping her, right? So we take it upon ourselves, if we can intervene, if we can direct him towards a resource in the community, we'll do that as well. Okay, so we have a consistent Crown team. We handpicked the trial Crown who are going to do domestic violence files, because much with any profession, people have different skill sets. People are good at different things. The trial Crown that's good at murders may not be good at handling a domestic violence file. So we do a transition interview, ideally, with that trial Crown. Once we've built a relationship with that complainant, we've met with her a number of times. If it is set for trial, we will try and meet with her and the trial Crown to sort of introduce them. So this is not just a blank suit showing up on the day of trial to say, okay, I'm your trial Crown for the day, here's our court, let's go in and get this done. She is getting to know that new Crown, who we're assuring her cares as much about this trial file as we do, and continuing that relationship with her. Right? Sometimes it's not easy to find the complaints. Sometimes it will be as simple as you come into court in the morning or into the office in the morning and the new in custody is on your desk and the complainant's calling immediately to say, I want him back. Other times we phone her. More commonly, we can't find her for one reason or another. So, we have a number of things we do to actively track them down. That's part of our working with our community partners, because, there are times when this is not a traditional household domestic violence. I've seen domestic violence files where we had two homeless people in a tent, where the guy smacked the girl in the face with a stick. So it's not always as easy as phoning her home to get a hold of her. Sometimes we've got to track her down on the street. So that's where liaising with our partners in the community comes in handy. We've got in Atmospheric, we've got the Warm Zone for an outreach program for street women. So we get to know these people that run these programs, and when we're having trouble finding someone, we talk to them. And they will help us locate these people. Okay? We work closely with the police and try and do education with them. When you're taking a report, get as many pieces of contact information as possible. Fine, you've got her phone number, but what if she leaves the house and goes to stay with her mom or her sister? Do you have her email address? Do you have her mom's name and phone number? Do you have her sister's number? Some other way of finding her. Because if we can find her, she probably wants to talk to us. Okay? And if we can't find her, we've got a serious problem with the Crown case. Okay? Let's see, what else can I say? Okay, so I'm going faster than I was planning to. Working towards resolution. Some of these files we are going to end up either having a trial or sometimes dropping the charges, but not for the traditional reasons that we did in the past. Oftentimes when I started doing this, we would set a matter down for trial simply because it's a domestic violence file and they have to go to trial. But that's not always the best resolution for a victim. As you've heard a couple of times, putting a victim through a trial can sometimes be as traumatic as the initial incident. Not always, it depends on the incident. But being cross-examined by defense counsel is no fun project, let me tell you. So if we can avoid that for her, we do everything we can to do that. We actively work to resolve these files. And I did hear someone saying that they were critical of Crown in plea bargaining. And admittedly, plea bargaining sounds like a dirty thing when you talk about it. But anytime we offer a sentence to an accused, he has the right to plead guilty. Well, that's a plea bargain. Okay, we've offered him something, he's accepted it. Is that bad? No, we're by law obliged to tell him what our sentencing position is. Are we selling the farm? That would be bad. Okay, are we leaving her high and dry? That would be bad. On the other hand, if we get a resolution that she approves of, that some way moderates the risks, that some way deals with the issues that led to this, I'd say that was a win-win situation, especially if she goes away believing in the resolution and believing in the Crown that came up with it. And if something bad happens in the future, maybe she's more likely to phone the police the next time. Okay, so that's part of our plan. When we do come up with these plea bargains or these resolutions without a trial, we have to talk to the victims. We have to get their input. I mean, that's policy, that's the law. So, you know, does the victim always get a say? Does the victim always get what she wants? No, absolutely not. I mean, we can't even always get a hold of the victim, but we try. And it's part of what we're supposed to do. It's part of what we do. If we do end up going to trial, again, we do the transition meeting with the trial Crown. If it's a high-risk file, we've got our domestic violence unit, our detective, and our victim services worker are working with this person to prepare them for trial, working with the trial Crown, bringing the victim to court. Sometimes I've had our detective go and pick her up wherever she was and bring her to court because she wasn't going to make it otherwise. So we have a lot of resources out there that we work with to help get her to court. Okay? If we get her there, if she believes in us, there's a much lower chance of her saying, I'm not testifying, I changed my story, I lied, or I can't remember. It's never going to happen. I mean, there are always going to be situations where that happens, but I believe it's happening a lot less frequently, where we've done work to build that relationship at the outset. Especially if she doesn't see us as the enemy. If she sees the point behind the trial as putting her man in jail, if that's how she's looking at it, then why would she buy into it? Unless, of course, this is a particularly enlightened complainant, and this is a serious file where she never wants to see him again. And we do have some of those, but they're not the bulk of our files. The bulk of our files are the ones where she wants him back. Possibly because, you know, she doesn't want to take care of the kids on her own, possibly because she's financially dependent on them. But we can't necessarily change that decision on her part. All we can do is actively work to make her believe in the system and minimize the risk to her if she gets back together with him. Okay? So that's what we do in that regard. There was another individual I heard asking about the victim impact fees. And to some extent, Judge Gill hit it on the head. It is sort of an after-the-fact consideration. We do try and pay attention to it when we can. Okay? Obviously, our primary concern in sentencing is risk management, but it is something we consider. But something else that we should say is that, I mean, if you've watched sentencings in criminal court and domestic violence, you've probably seen a wide variety of sentences. One sentence you're hopefully rarely going to see is a fine for a number of reasons. One is that, well, from my perspective, probably over 70% of these women are going back into a relationship with that man in some way or another, either living with them or co-parenting in some respects. So they are financially dependent on him. So if we take money away from him, we are taking it away from her at the same time. Okay? If she's financially dependent on him, fining him is hurting her. Okay? So it's something that we have to be cognizant of. It would be a far better sentence to get him some community supervision and counseling than to say, well, here's a $2,000 fine, never do this again. That might have a deterrent effect to a card thief, but domestic violence is not about, yeah, you know, I think I've weighed all the risk factors, I can get away with beating her tonight. From my perspective, that's just not the way it happens. So the deterrent effect of a $2,000 fine, not really there. And the same might be said of the victim fine surcharge. There are going to be times when the defense counsel, and they're the ones that argue for it, say, I'm going to ask you to waive the victim fine surcharge. Should Crown be opposing that? Well, we're certainly cognizant of the fact of where that money goes. But if finances are tight and she's dependent on him, then we also have to be thinking, are we penalizing her because he's not doing enough for work? So it's just one of those things that we take into account. Okay? All right. So the other thing, as I've mentioned a few times, that our domestic violence project involved is liaising with other partners in the community. So our K-file team will get all of these K-files that come in. We'll do all the charge approval. We'll do the initial risk assessment. We'll do the bail hearing, generally speaking, if we can. We will appear in court with that file every time that it's in court. We'll meet with the complainants. We'll liaise with the police. Once the file is resolved, we will be getting a file resolution report. So Crown that finally resolved it, oftentimes the K-file team, sometimes the trial Crown, will do a report back to the trial, so the K-file team saying, here's how it went, here's what happened, here's why it happened. So that we've got that to look and say, okay, could we have done a better job? Can we tweak what we did? Is there something we could do differently? We've also got it on the unfortunate occasion when this couple comes back to our attention later down the road on a new file. And we can pull that old one, and then we've got this great little memo saying, okay, here's how she was in trial, here's what happened. We've got all that old info. It's also the reason that we archive almost all of our domestic violence files. So we keep the physical file, and that's not necessarily true of all Justice Department files. But these ones are of special significance because there are details in there that are just not reflected in the charge and the criminal record. Our notes, for example, are in there. So we keep all of that stuff so that if he does come back, and unfortunately, as we all know, he's likely to come back, we've got all the previous files to show what he's done, what he's said, how he's behaved. You know, has he told us he was going to get counseling and then not done it? Should we believe him this time or not believe him? So we've got more information, okay? And we share that information with our community partners because, you know, we've got a lot of resources in the community. We can all work together, pool our resources, pool our intelligence, and figure out what's going on, what's the best way to deal with this situation. And the other thing we did to cap off our K-file team, and this, it may start to seem like we're doing a lot of social work, is we follow the file after resolution, if it is what we would call a higher risk file. So if we categorize it as a higher risk file, even after it's resolved, we'll keep it on our radar. We will have regular meetings with our domestic violence unit and our probation office to see how this guy's doing on his probation, on whatever sentence it is. Is he still in the system? Is he doing the counseling we wanted him to get? How's he behaving? Do we think he's still at the highest risk? Okay, and there are some that we've knocked off that high risk. There are some that sort of never make it to that point and they come back into the system as an active file. But we felt it was important not to just close it off at the date of sentence, because some of these people remain a high risk in the community. And Crown's input on, you know, what should we be doing is relevant, because we met with her, right? Probation will often have met with her as well. So we have these discussions once a month with probation services and with our domestic violence police unit to decide, you know, is this guy still a high risk? We've actually had situations where we felt it was such a high risk that we've had our domestic violence unit go and sit and watch it, okay? And then we'll get a breach charge. So we've heightened the community awareness and the community response to this particular domestic violence case. So that's, in a nutshell, what the Abbotsford office's approach to the challenges in prosecuting domestic violence files is. It's not perfect. We continue to evolve in our approach. We talk to other Crown and other offices, get their perspectives. You know, we've adopted things that other Crown have done. Other Crown have tried things that we're doing. Not perfect. Every single file is different in some way or another. Every community is different. We all have different resources. But we do recognize that these are very specialized files that require a different level of scrutiny and vigilance, a special response, if you will, than the average file, okay? So, and I think it has been working. How much has it been working? Difficult to say. That's one of the weaknesses, I suppose, in our justice system, is a way to measure success. Do we measure it by way of convictions? Not always. There are some people out there, some of these files that we have been so impressed with, that we've withdrawn the charges because they've taken responsibility, they've done things themselves to the point where our overall risk assessment is almost at a zero level, you know, where we've said, okay, you know what, if you've gone to court, you would have got some kind of a forgiveness, a discharge, and been put on these programs. You've done all that yourself, you know. Maybe at this point there's no longer a public interest in prosecuting. So there are going to be cases like that. Well, how do you measure success when you've got cases like that? Not every stay of proceedings is a failure. Okay, some of them are a success. Not every jail sentence is a success. You know, maybe this is a situation where we could get him to get help or to acknowledge responsibility. So it's really hard to tell when it's actually working. But we try to be as creative as we can and take a special look at each case and see what it is that we can do to make her believe that we're the good guys. Okay? Because I think if we can do that, we've gone some ways along the line. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you for your presentation today. I have a question. You mentioned addressing privacy offenders
Yes.
in the area of domestic violence. I'm wondering what can or what is being done to track prior records of criminal or police involvement across borders, particularly, just as an example, perhaps U.S. and Canada. How can, for example, myself being a child protection social worker, apart from having the legislation locally and provincially to be able to inquire to the RCMP about a record or police involvement, how does that get extended to other borders?
It's an excellent question, and if anybody else here has a good idea, I'm open to it. I mean, it's certainly something that we wrestle with on a daily basis. If we've got somebody, an accused, on a file, and we think, okay, this guy is a risk, clearly there must be a history, but we can't see any history, then the question marks go up as to, well, where did he just come from? You know, where is that history? Because we know it's there. It's hard. I mean, we obviously, and I'm sure you guys know, we have access to a certain amount of criminal record history in BC with our Justin system, and then we have the CPIC printouts, but only if they're up to date. And I don't know how long CPIC is currently taking to get updated, but I've seen offenses that are 3 years old that haven't been entered yet. Maybe it's because of the fingerprint problem or something else. So I mean, we do rely on those systems. I can, if need be, ask my detective to make inquiries in other jurisdictions. And I've had our outskirt detective contact police agencies in another jurisdiction and get their police record system printout for, I mean, we had one from New Brunswick we investigated. It turned out he had bench warrants from there for another domestic violence file. So, I mean, that's where we're at. Obviously, technological advances will help in that area. As far as legislative changes, it's a bit beyond my station, but I think it would have to be federal, not local, because you're talking about criminal records. And just to answer the last part of that, American records are probably easier to get than other provincial records that haven't been CPIC yet, because we can just have our detective make a request of the, I think it's the FBI, and they're happy to provide us with information. Or Homeland Security. You'd be amazed the stuff we get from Homeland Security. But it's a police request for assistance. Does that answer anything?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for what you've shared with us today. I just have a few questions. Actually, just one main point I wanted to make was, I heard a lot today about some of the reasons why women may change their mind, from being cultural issues to not wanting her family to be broken up and many other factors. But one of the things that I haven't heard yet today, and I just wondering if you could speak more to it, is when a woman's afraid for her life. One of the main cases that I often see is that why women will change their minds is lack of support within the system, a lack of support within the community. And so oftentimes she's going back because she feels that it's either going with the devil you know or the devil you don't know, so to speak, if I use that scenario.
Yep.
And so the other issue is around feeling blamed. Oftentimes women are having to lose their business, their workplaces, their homes. Many times she's forced and coerced into being dependent on the abuser. It's a strategy that is used from the very beginning all the way to the end. I understand there's many different factors, multiple reasons how things like this can happen, but one of the main cases that I've seen oftentimes is that she does want support and she does want help. And so I'm just wondering if you could speak more to that for the cases where women are trying to access support, but there's a long drawn-out procedure where oftentimes she's not getting the help that she needs, and oftentimes end up either in prison for self-defense or end up dead or end up with poverty or losing her children.
Well, I mean, what I can say is that that's part of the reason for our early contact with the victim, is because, I mean, we recognize that the longer we leave her ignored, the more at risk she is, right? At the risk of some pressure to change her mind, at risk of losing all her faith in the system, at risk of all the things she's at risk of anyway. So we try to get her on the phone at least day one when this happens, and schedule an appointment for her to come in and sit down with us, preferably with a victim services worker right there, for two reasons. One, to try and figure out what those risks are, and two, we got victim services there. They're more than just victim services. I mean, they're sort of our hub for community resources, is the way I like to treat victim services workers. They know everything that I don't know about the community resources, hopefully. But I mean, that's why we have, I mean, part of our project was not just to get Crown involved, it was to build a web of community partners who could help pounce on this problem. We're not going to catch every issue, but I think this particular technique, we're going to catch more of the problems than if we just treat it like a shoplifting case. So, I mean, that's what we do. We can't obviously force her to come in. We can't force her to tell us what's going on, but we can try. We can do the best that we can. I don't know if that answers your question, but...
Well, I guess the point I was trying to get at is what kind of actions, like actual tangible actions, that would encourage her to know that she will be safe if she does come out.
Okay.
And I understand that issues
Yeah.
are complex and there's more reasons for that, but that's just...
So I sort of answered it without giving you any specifics. I mean, we do have resources in the community to protect. Okay? If we identify a file as a high risk, let's assume the police, for some reason, haven't clued in that it's a high risk file. Part of our process for doing the interview is to figure out if it is a high risk file. If it is, we immediately involve our domestic violence detective and the specialized victim services worker to help pounce on those risks. And they have a whole series of resources they can bring to bear to enhance her safety and security in the community. From the Nevr's alarm system, to getting her a phone, to moving her out of the community altogether if need be, okay? So identification of risks is crucial to that, which is again why we need to get her in as quick as we can while she's still either in shock or relatively on board, and talk to her. You know, let her understand that we are here to listen to her, okay? As a way of assessing those risks. So I think early intervention is the best way to figure out what the risks are. Once we know what the risks are, we have resources in the community to help. I won't say we can reduce the risks to nothing because that's impossible, but we can help.
Hi,
Yep.
Simon, I'm from Jacinta, Bolton, from Vancouver.
Hey.
So Amy and I are beginning to do what you guys did a couple of years ago in Vancouver. Just to respond to the last woman's comment and question, first of all, it's eerie how we're echoing what you're doing. It's kind of disconcerting, actually. One of the key things, I think, is exactly as you say, is picking up the phone when a new in custody comes in and talking with the victim a lot of issues almost instantly arise. First of all, we're trying to determine bail conditions 9 times out of 10. Usually people are not detained unless they're recidivists, and then we try and keep them in jail. That's the best way to control the risk. The drop down, and in most cases, we're trying to craft conditions that are going to work for her. Usually she has children. Quite often she's culturally isolated. Quite often she's dependent on the accused family. So there's financial issues, there's children, sometimes there's immigration issues. So right out of the gate, we're looking at 3 systems that she's going to have to navigate whilst raising little babies, whilst wondering where he is, whilst being fearful. So it's a nightmare. I mean, it's a logistical nightmare. When I hear about this new department, what I wish is they could just fund victim services workers properly. Have an accused person in purview, if the K file gets put on, I phone the office of blah blah, and I say, hi, we just got a new one. This is the name of the woman who's the complainant. She's got 2 kids. Can you assign a victim services worker? Yeah. They open a file. They go around. They say, right, you need help getting emergency funding. Okay, you'll need to go to family court because the bail conditions are you are to have no contact accused, directly or indirectly, except pursuant to family court order. That's usually the case where there's kids, and there's no suggestion that the accused has been violent directly with the kids. The violence is played out sometimes in front of the kids. But what that's doing is criminal court judges are deferring to the family court. They're saying, okay, everybody get into family court in a perfect world. Only, where does that woman even begin to know how to get into family court? I don't know how to get into family court. Yeah, who's a family court counselor? Perhaps they don't even speak English. It's a nightmare, right? So I think the number one thing to do is to talk to them and say, do you have a social worker? Okay, phone your social worker. I'm going to let them know that we're charging him. What kind of conditions do you want? In the meantime, we're going to do this. He's going to have to stay away from you completely. Would you be okay with telephone access? Is there a third party? Just make it real so that they can live.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
you know what? How would if my partner was suddenly gone and I've got the kids, like, well, what? I can't even talk to them. A lot of times it's completely unrealistic, So I think it would be ideal if we could have one person who knows those resources who could work with that. One woman, we don't. But I completely agree with what Simon's saying. What we need to do is connect right away. Find out what the reality of that person's situation is. And in a perfect world too, and just as an aside, I'll sit down, it's also acknowledge when we talk to them, and I know you do this because you mentioned it, the difference between respecting how horrible it would be to give evidence about what happened, but also that it did happen. And that they're not going to lie about it.
Yes. Totally.
And by being truthful about it, they have the power to change what's going on and change him, make him responsible. The ball's in his court now, And once they understand that we know that it's not going to be easy, they're with us, they're talking to us, and maybe we can work with the bail conditions. They're not written in stone. If you feel safe, we can work with them. You're absolutely right on what you said about using that as a bargaining chip and keeping them close. And then if it doesn't go ahead and it's not a conviction, they'll say, this is great, thanks, and they'll pick up the phone if there is a next time, and hopefully if it's worked, there won't be. So, why not?
Thanks.
Because we heard earlier about how we don't know what happens after somebody's been sentenced, whether they're actually getting the programming and the treatment that they're sentenced to. So how are you finding, are they actually participating and completing that treatment? Because, I work mostly with Surrey, and I have no idea if these people, the offenders, get the treatment or not.
It's a good question, but it's as simple as filling out probation. And saying, who's the probation officer? What are you recommending? When is he started? It varies from case to case. I've seen cases where the guy is there day one at Respect for Relationships, participating fully. I've seen the other guys that say, oh no, you don't have to work, I've got a job interview, and 8 months go by and he's now applying to delete the term, right? So it's completely case specific. So what we're trying to do is to say, okay, we can't monitor every single case because, as Jeff said, actually I think it's closer to 25% of our caseload are K files, because we classify the breaches as K files as well. We can't monitor them all under the microscope, but the ones that we call high risk, we do monitor them. We go over and say, okay, we think when we sent him over here, he was at a high risk to reoffend. What are you doing? You know, have you bumped him to the top of the line? You know, there are also other community resources out there. We've had probation say, you know what, we've had funding issues, we're going to have to refer him to this other program, or he's found a program, we've talked to the moderators, we agree that it would be an appropriate program if he can provide proof that he signed up for it. So they've got the information if we talk to them, okay? And as I say, we try to monitor as many as we can, but I mean, at the same time as monitoring the people we've already prosecuted, we've got a whole whack of new ones that are coming in the door. But we can find out. And then when he comes back to say, oh, I'm working so hard, I have to have this term deleted, we've got a relationship with that probation officer who's going to give us a quick report and say, nope, he's been avoiding this treatment from the get-go. Let's, one, oppose the deletion, and two, let's breach him on it right now. Okay? So we take it very seriously when they don't do the treatment we want them to do.
But I have to say, it would have been wonderful if we had the same situation in every community, but all we know that it's not the same. We know that the people on bail, the accused on bail, are out there and they're breaching, and the breach is not reported for whatever reason. We know that they're sent after their conviction to take different trainings or counselings. First of all, they're not enough, and if they are, and if they don't attend, we don't get the report and they're not reached. So it is good to hear in Abbotsford you have a very good relationship as a community together, and you're getting on it, and we are hoping that in every community we see that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so that is, now we